Why 160 Ohana? I wanted to make a video today with terms of trade and showing how to calculate that if you just have a schedule. For this example, I thought it might be interesting to consider looking at Indonesia. Indonesia happens to be the third largest global producer of rice. With that much market power that they have, that would put them in the category of a large country, at least in terms of rice production. Indonesians consume a lot of rice. Many of their dishes have rice in it. It's very good food. If you, so I thought this might be at least an interesting country to use. Now I did make up a table that I could use for this example. It's not like really close, but at least with the international equilibrium happens to be the current global price of a 100-weight bag of rice. 100-weight bag of rice means that it's a bag of rice that has 100 pounds, or it's about 45 kilos of rice. So that's a scenario we have. At least initially, let's look at equilibrium. What happens at an autarky? An autarky means there's no international trade, which means that all of the domestic demand is only satisfied by the domestic supply. To compute the equilibrium, we need to find where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, which happens to be right about here. And so a quantity of 21 at a price of $24 gives us, and it satisfies market equilibrium. And we can use a schedule, and that's nice. If what might be more useful, especially if you don't have if you don't have like a super fancy piece of graph paper, you can just throw this on the back of a napkin. Then you could do a bunch of, or your scratch paper, and then you can do a bunch of algebra to make sure you have the right points, which will help you when you calculate for it to be doing the geometry that we do. So let's calculate the demand equation. You'll recall from algebra that the equation of a line is y equals mx plus b. In economics, the y-axis is price, x-axis is quantity. And so really we're looking at price equals mq plus b. And to do this, oh wait, first of all, let's do that slope thing first. Rise over run. And so if you have 0 minus 45, that gives us negative 45. 45 minus 0. And then this reduces down to a slope of -1. We throw that in here. If we're trying to do this equation, I like to pick this one right here because it's got a big fat 0. We plug that in here. Anything times 0 is 0. That makes math a little bit easier. The b part of here, the price intercept is 45, which means that our demand equation is going to be price equals -1 plus 45. We want to do the same thing for the supply equation that we have right here. We have, let's see, let me clean this up a little bit. So we have 3 minus 45 and 0 minus 42, which is negative 42 over 42, which is positive 1. We can plug that in here for the slope into a point where we have something like, oh, here we go. Pick this right here, which has a big fat 0, which gives us the supply equation of price equals Q plus 3. And that's convenient. Now, when we draw our back of the napkin graph, we can make sure that even if our graph lines aren't perfectly beautiful, we know where each of these important points are, and so we can get the general shape. Consumer surplus, that's everything above the price, below the demand curve. And so what we're looking at is, we're looking at 21, Q equals 21. This line right here is going to be 21. Then we want to calculate the height, which is going to be 45 minus 24, which happens to be 21. So 21 squared. And we divide it by 2 because when you multiply those two together, you get the area of a square. We don't want the area of a square. We just want the bottom half. We just want consumer surplus. And we do that, we get 220.5. We do the same thing for producer surplus, where we have 21 is the length here. And then the height is going to be 24 minus 3, which is 21 as well. You multiply these two together. If you multiply both of them, you get this huge square. We just want just half right here to be surplus. Everything below the price above the supply curve. And that gives us the producer surplus. Total economic surplus is the summation of both the consumer and the producer surplus. Okay, well, that's great. I'm glad we figured that out. Let's make it a little bit more interesting. And let's say Indonesia happens to enter the world market and engage in international trade. The world market has but because Indonesia produces so much rice, we're gonna have some slope. It won't just be a price taker. And well, let's see, we can look at the schedule itself, and based off of the schedule, we can see that right here, the world supply of 30 can satisfy the demand of 30 at a price of 15. That gives us this point right here on this graph, if you were to throw it in a graph. If you're graphing this in Excel, what you'll want to do is do the y-axis first, or the price. We come up with the equation where you have the x-axis, you throw that in there. Add another one of these, and you add that as well. And so you start off with the price with the y variables, and you add the x's. And that gives you the pretty little graphs. But we have this, okay, where were we at? We were looking at 30 units and 15. So I'm going to put 30 right there and 15. We already had the demand equation from before, but rather than recompute that, let's figure out this new supply equation. We'll do the same thing like we did before. We'll look at the rise over run, and that gives us a slope of 0.5. We plug in that to one of these points in here. We have which might be easiest right about here, which gives us price equals 0.5 times Q. It goes right through the origin. And based off of that, we can set the equations equal to each other and get what we already do, which we got from the schedule. How much is domestic production? We have a price of 15, plug that price of 15 into the domestic supply curve. So 15 is equal to Q plus 3. Subtract 3 from both sides. I guess just a little bit of that. And then you get quantity equals 12. So 12 units right here is the amount of domestic production. They're consuming 30. Therefore, 30 minus domestic production will leave you with the level of imports. What is a new consumer surplus? We know that we're going out to 30 units. Right here, this whole length is 30 units. What is the height of this? We go from 45 to 15, which is going to be 30. So 30 times 30 will give us this thing right here. We don't want this thing, we just want the bottom half of it, so we divide it by 2. 900 divided by 2 is going to give us a consumer surplus of 450. Changing consumer surplus, take the difference of the new minus the old. That means positive. It went up by 229, by about 230. What's the new producer surplus? There's this distributive effect, which used to belong to the producers, now it belongs to the consumers, but they lost that. The new producer surplus only goes down to 12 units that we calculated before. And then you take 15 minus where that's here is 3, which is going to be 12. So 12 times 12. But we're not doing this whole rectangle, we're just doing this triangle, so you divide it by 2. So therefore, the new producer surplus is 72. Change in producer surplus, you've got 72, whereas we had 220 and a half. Producer just lost out about 150. Pretty sure we know who's going to be banging on the door of the legislators to try to put something into place. Total economic surplus, we sum both of these two together, and we end up with 522, which is an 81, a big, huge increase of 81 from before. So that's what happens without any mucking of the of the economy. What happens if you put in some sort of barrier to trade? A barrier to trade can be in the place of either a tariff or quota. They're implemented differently. It's in chapter 5 when we look at quotas. But I think it's important to bring this up here because really it comes to the same thing at the very end. If you put a tariff, I mean, either one, you're gonna push the supply curve back. You push it back 2 different ways, but they both lead to the same thing. And the way tariff works is you just increase the y-intercept by the amount of the tariff. What happens is if you have a quota, let's say you add a quota of 6 units. When we're at this equilibrium price of 15, which means that at 15, the domestic production is going to be right here. We import 6 units. That's going to stop right, that's where the buck stops, right at 18 units. At 18 units, there's going to be this big, huge gap. You'll have excess demand. And what happens? You've got these guys over here. They're going to pay $40, almost 45. You'll have these guys that'll pay 25. All these guys here are willing to pay. The demand curves is an expression of willingness to pay. They're going to pay a lot more than what they're currently paying. And they don't want to wait in line or whatever it is. So they're going to start bidding up the price. And anybody above here is willing, because I mean, they have some consumer surplus that they could spend to ensure that they at least have something. And eventually if they bid up the price to, say, for example, right here, you still have a shortage, so you're gonna keep bidding it up until it'll be right here. And so you have some point. And once you figure out where that is, you can draw a parallel line to the world supply. And then you can use that for the rest of the calculation if you're doing a quota. Okay, now that we have our new supply curve, either it's either given to you or not, I guess you can figure it out. If they just tell you that you have some sort of a trade barrier, you can derive the new supply curve. I'm going to look at this one. We have what is a new equilibrium. If we use this schedule, how do we determine what the new equilibrium is? You find where quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied with the trade barrier. It looks like we're at 24 and price of 21. So I'm going to write 24 with price of 21. And then let's start calculating things. Let me grab this over here. So we have the schedule. We have the demand curve hasn't changed at all. We have this new supply curve, which is 9 units higher. We have the same slope as before. You set them equal to each other and we'll get the same thing like we did with the schedule. What is the level of domestic production? At a price of 21, we'll take the domestic supply curve, plug in the price, so 21 equals Q plus 3, which gives us 18. No, I think I'm just going to take this and I'll drag it over here. So because now we're done with the schedule, we're just doing a bunch of math. And so a price quantity of, let's see, of 18, we're looking at domestic production is at 18, which is right here. What is importation? They're consuming 24. So 24 minus 18 is going to be 6. That's the distance of this ray right here. What is a new consumer surplus? Consumer surplus is going to be 45 minus 21, and which is 24. And then you go from this point all the way out to this point, to 24. If we multiply those two together, we'll end up with this square. But really, we just want this bottom half, so we'll divide it by 2. And the new consumer surplus is going to be 288. What's the new producer surplus? We have 21 minus 3, which we have right here. And this goes out to 18, what the domestic production is. So you multiply the two together and you'll end up with this square, but we only want half of it, so divide it by 2. The new producer surplus is 162. What is a redistributive effect? The redistributive effect is the dark blue area. And if we were to take, let's see, it was at $15 before. So we take that previous $15, plug it into the domestic supply curve, and we'll have 12 right here. So you can, and this is the height of 6, so 12 times 6, we have this. Or we can do, see, it's up 6 and over 6, multiply those two together. We only want this part right here, so we divide it by 2. So 72 plus 18, the two blue areas, excuse me, just the dark blue area, which is this rectangle right here and this triangle right here, is going to be 90. And so that's the amount of consumer surplus that was lost to the producers. And if somebody is going to knock on somebody's door, it will be them. It probably won't be, because the producers, you have a lot fewer producers producing a bunch of units with a lot more consumers. So if you only have like that, which means that it distributes a lot further out. It dissipates a lot further among the consumers. The marginal benefit of talking to a legislator is going to be a lot lower per consumer compared to the benefit that the producer would have, which is usually why we have these trade effects being imposed on us. Nickel and dime. Okay, let's look at the protective effect. Protective effect is a gray area. It's part of the deadweight loss. And we know that this is 12, and this comes up to 18. So that's going to be 6. We know that this is 6. So 6 times 6 is 36. We just want this bottom half. And so that's, we divide it by 2. We already gave the other half to the producers. This is going to be a protective effect of 18. The consumptive effect is this black area right here. They were at 30. Now they're at 24. So this is 6. And we know that this is 6 as well. In this case, because the slopes are the same for each of these, you end up with the same amount. They're both going to be 18. Total deadweight loss, you add both of the protective and consumption effect together, and that will give you the total amount of deadweight loss. What is a domestic revenue effect? Amount of taxes that the consumers are paying. So before they were paying $15, now they're paying 21. So that's a difference of 6. That's right here, and they're importing 6. So 6 times 6 is 36. So the domestic revenue effect is 36. Now, this is if you have a tariff. On the other hand, if you have quota, the amount of whoever owns a quota as a property right will gets a benefit of that's part of the revenue effect. The amount of the revenue effect that's borne by domestic consumption will be this area within the brown that I'm just marking up. What is the terms of trade? Terms of trade is what the foreign producers end up paying when they import, in terms of that benefits either if it's a tariff, then it goes to the government. If it's quota, then the terms of trade goes to that's the foreign contribution of being able, the benefit of having that property right and being able to limit the quantity of units that are being brought in. So that's this orange area right here. We're at 15. This, if you want to take the world supply curve and you plug in 24, that will give you this value right here, which is, let's see, you plug in 24, and that's going to be, it looks like about 12. And 12 up to 15 is going to be 3. So we have a height of 3 and a length of 6, which is going to be 18. So the terms of trade that we have is 18. The total revenue effect is, you have the domestic revenue effect, In terms of trade effects, it's gonna be 54. Total economic surplus, if we count, we add the, we have the consumer surplus, producer surplus, and we have the total revenue effect. We add up each of those together, and we end up with 504. What's the total change in surplus? Before we had 500, so we have 504 now, before we had 522. So in this case, it happens to be -18. You can also look at how the terms of trade compares to deadweight loss. The terms of trade is less than what the deadweight loss is. If the terms of trade is greater than the deadweight loss, and then you won't see a negative number here for the change in total surplus. That's the times when a country can actually be better off by having some sort of a trade barrier. Now that might probably only be in the short run, because really in the long run, when one country starts doing these things, you can initiate a trade war, and the other country starts adding tariffs, and then we got to recalculate all these things, and usually that ends up, both countries end up being worse off as a result of trade barrier, of the trade war. Well, great. I hope this explanation is useful and can help you understand a little bit better how to do all the calculations, even if you don't have just everything all drawn nicely before. Or you can either draw it nicely, or you can do a really bad job drawing, but you can put the correct amounts in there, which allows you to do correct computations.